2 Timothy, that chapter 3 says that the Word of God is profitable for 4 specific things. And talks about training and instruction and reproof and correction. So one of those ideas there, and according to what's going on in 1 Samuel, in 2 Timothy, is that we learn in general. And one of the other things that we get from all of that is, sometimes we are trained to do more, to do better, to do something that we haven't been doing, to grow. Not to grow necessarily in knowledge, but to grow in service. Proof, of course, is if we're doing something we shouldn't be doing. And correction is along the same lines. One is to correct us if we're doing something that's not quite the right way. Reproof is if we're doing something wrong and bringing us back. So those are the 4 things that Paul told Timothy that the Word of God is useful for. So with those 4 ideas in mind, instruction, training, correction, reproof, which of those apply to what you've learned thus far in our little survey of the Old Testament?
They started training because everything that they did was very symbolic and very structured. Mm-hmm. So they started training when they were small. They started Psalm 119. They used that psalm was to teach the children all about everything in their beliefs. So that was training. They started, everything was traditional. Everything, they did it always the same. And I think that's one thing that they did for training.
Okay, but what we're going through on Sunday nights is
probably for doctrine.
For instruction, doctrine. Have any of you in here been affected any other way than doctrine?
So I think nearly every time I read the Bible, there's reproof.
Was it Martin Luther who said that it wasn't Martin. I think it was Martin Luther. He didn't care for the book of James too terribly much. He didn't think it should be in the Bible, but I think he's the one who said, every time I read it, I leave bloodied. I've been cut up or something like that. I just want to make sure, because I don't want this just to be an exercise we all go through. I want it to be true to the Word of God and that it is profitable. And so that's what the Word of God is profitable for. Has this been profitable for you?
Yes.
And so, how has it been profitable, I guess is my question then.
I think it's because we're looking at the history of the things that is the way it's always been. Now, when we were not following what we need to know what happens. And so we look at the history and we're learning from the things that happened when we weren't doing what we're supposed to do, what can happen when we do what God wants us to do.
So the history of that. Someone else.
You see how the Bible is connected. It's just interwoven throughout. And also, we see the theme remains the same throughout the Old Testament. I know already it's going to lead all the way through the New Testament.
Those people are exactly the same as what we are.
The more we change, the more we stay the same. Until we get to second hesitations, and then it's a completely different ball of wax. Okay, well, is the battery still? Oh, the battery's still good. I love it. I just found out that I had this turned on for a week without being used. So that's why we looked at David becomes king. What do you remember about David becoming king? Well, this is after Saul's death. What do you remember about David becoming king?
It wasn't quite as easy as he thought it was.
Wasn't that easy? Okay.
He was the youngest son.
He was the runt. of the family. What else?
What temptations that he would bring?
Yeah. How did he learn how to be king before he ever became king? Yeah, Saul, whether it was a good example or bad, he knew how not to do it, perhaps because of being with Saul, but also the inner workings of court and all that sort of stuff. How did Saul? Trial and error. He didn't really have an example. Well, there's more material on David than there is on anybody else in the Old Testament. However, you'll notice that only 8 chapters are devoted to him becoming king. And then starting with chapter 9 through chapter 20, those 12 chapters all talk about who's going to succeed him as king. And this is still part of the whole David narrative. This is some of the finest writing in antiquity. Not just Bible scholars, but literary scholars like to point to what we're looking at in 2 Samuel chapters 9 through 20 as fine writing. It's ripe with intrigue, plot development, and characterization. All those words that you probably heard however many years ago when in school, and you probably haven't thought about them since. I didn't really think about any of those things until I started looking a little bit deeper into this. But if you stop and you think about it, there is plot development, there's characterization, there's intrigue. And so from strictly a literary perspective, if nothing else, this is good literature. This is good reading. This is riveting, as you tackle it. It also reveals knowledge of court life. It reveals knowledge of conversations that were, by all accounts, should have been in private. How did they know about it? How did they know about it? And the whole idea of the court history of David is interrupted by appendices in chapters 21 through 24. Another way of wording that is he's the author of 2 Samuel, or Samuel, is wrapping up loose ends. And so 2 Samuel 21 through 24 are not necessarily in chronological order. Because you'll notice that right here, well, let me back up one. You'll notice that right here, Saul and David, they're struggling. And at the end of this in chapter 31, Saul falls on his own sword and he dies. Well, you would think that would be, and then boom, all of this is about David becoming king. Well, the passage I read at the beginning falls in the middle of these appendices. It's chapter 22. And that's when I said, David spoke to the Lord the words of this song on the day when the Lord delivered him from the hand of all of his enemies and from the hand of Saul. So this goes back and forth. It's not necessarily in strictly chronological order whenever we get to this last one, because like I said, they're tying up some loose ends. So, in addition to what is going on in court life, we see some strengths and weaknesses of David. And one of the strengths of David was Jonathan's surviving son Mephibosheth. What did he do with Mephibosheth?
Brought him to the house and said that he would eat at his table.
Okay, who was Mephibosheth other than Jonathan's surviving son? What do you know about him? Saul's grandson. What else? He was crippled. What happened to him that he was crippled? Yeah. The babysitter dropped him. Yeah, and he was lame in both feet. He couldn't walk. So he was lame in both feet. David took him in the royal palace, provided for him for the rest of his life. Why did he do this for Mephibosheth? He and Jonathan had made a pact, an agreement. They had entered into a covenant with one another. And that covenant, that agreement was, I will take care of your family. If you die, you will take care of my family if I die. And Jonathan died on Mount Gilboa, the same battle where Saul fell on his own sword back in 1 Samuel chapter 31. And so he went looking so he could fulfill this promise that he had made to Jonathan. And he found this guy, Mephibosheth. It's unusual. Why? Right there, that middle bullet point. In that day and age, you did not show kindness to a rival. And Mephibosheth was a rival. When David became king, by all rights, and not just by all rights, but by all expectations, he would have annihilated, wiped off, executed, killed all of Saul's descendants. But he did not do that with Mephibosheth. It's a result of the promise that he made. Beautiful picture of one of the strengths of David. He is not giving in to social custom. He is holding true to the promise that he made to a friend of his. Can you think of any weaknesses he may have had? We're talking about David, not Solomon. He had at least a time weakness.
But he also had heart, because when he took, what was her name? Abigail. Was it Abigail?
Yeah. The widow of Nabal.
Yes, and he took her into his house also because of the way that she had treated his men.
He actually married her.
But yeah, he married her.
Yeah.
But she was older, and anyway, whatever. I think
And he was already married.
Yeah, I think it showed that he did have heart.
I think he just liked her attitude.
Well, she did save her husband's life, and then her husband died of a heart attack, thanks to God, the next day. But, yeah. Well, during the Ammonite War, David stayed at home instead of going to the front, and he had a rather unusual illicit encounter that he should not have had. With whom did he commit the sin of adultery? Bathsheba. Who rebukes David for that sin? I know God did, but what human? Nathan. How did he do it? The little lamb. He gave him a parable. Oh, this man, he only had one little ewe lamb. He raised it. He fed it from his table. Okay, I draw the line some places. I'm not going to feed a ewe lamb from my table. But, of course, we know that. And then the rich man had all these and visitors, and he goes and he takes the one little ewe lamb. And what did David say whenever Nathan confronted him with that? Well, he said that man needs to pay how much? 4 times over. And as we look at the result of all of this, we could see that David easily paid 4 times over for what he did. It happened that he didn't go off to war, and so he's up on the roof, strolling around in the cool of the day. It's evening, and his eyes are attracted to somebody taking a bath on the roof of another building. And so he has her brought to him, and he has an affair with her. She becomes pregnant. So he decides, plan A. I know what I can do. She's going to be pregnant. Everybody's going to wonder. Her husband is off fighting. I'll say, send me her husband to bring me news, and I'll tell him to just, spend the night, go back to the front tomorrow. And her husband was Uriah the Hittite. And so he said, just send Uriah the Hittite, bring me news. He'll spend the night and he'll go back tomorrow. So Uriah the Hittite came to bring him the news. And David said, spend the night, go back home tomorrow. That way, whenever it comes out that Bathsheba is pregnant, it'll be Uriah's baby. Why did plan A not work? He didn't go home. He said, I can't go home and be with my wife while all my comrades are out fighting. So David comes up with plan B. Plan B is, I'm going to convince him to stay another night. And this time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get him drunk. So he won't be able to stop. So he tells him, spend one more night, take this message back to Joab tomorrow. And he said, okay. And he fed him a bunch of wine, and he got really drunk. Why did that not work? He still didn't go home. He may have been drunk, but he wasn't going to go home. So what was plan C? Send him to the front line where the battling is, the fighting is the fiercest, and then have everybody else pull away. And he wrote all that out in a missive to Joab, rolled it up, sealed it, gave it to Uriah, and said, take this to Joab. Joab read it and obeyed his king. And Uriah was killed. He carried his own death warrant all the way back to battle. in his hand. We don't see Joab questioning anything here. And, of course, then David does the noble kingly thing. This was one of his valiant men, and so he's going to console the grieving widow. And then it'll be no surprise if she turns up pregnant. What happened to that first child? After 7 days. I'm sorry? Well, he died because of David, yeah. But David and Bathsheba had a second child, and what was that second child's name? Or Jedediah. Either one of those. So that's where Solomon actually comes from. So that's only chapters 9, 10, 11, 12, but the reason why we have that in there is because we need to know why Solomon and Bathsheba and where Bathsheba came from and all of that information. Without that, we would ask questions, but we wouldn't be any worse for the wear, but it does tell us how all of this happened. So the struggle for succession answers the question, who's going to succeed David as king? 3 sons had aspirations to be king, Absalom, Adonijah, and Solomon. However, who is the crown prince? For that matter, what is a crown prince? That's the one who's going to inherit the crown. That is, in most places, in most countries, the crown prince is the oldest male offspring unit in that world. In this world, it could be either male or female. It could be either king or queen. But in that world, it was the oldest son. So, who was the actual crown prince? No, not Absalom. He wasn't the firstborn. No, Solomon wasn't either. I'm sorry? Amnon. If you actually take a look at chapter 3, verses 2 through 5, it tells you all the sons that were born to David while he was king in Hebron. And they're listed in order, in birth order. 6 sons, 6 different women. Amnon, Kileab, Absalom, Adonijah, Shephatiah. I'm pronouncing these and giving it my best shot as I go along here. And Ithream, if you will. So Amnon is the oldest. He's the crown prince. Then Kileab. Then Absalom. And then Adonijah. And I just happened to mention that there's 3 that had aspirations. And who are those 3? Absalom, Adonijah, and Solomon. Solomon's not even on this list. That's how far down the line he is. And the crown prince is Amnon. And why did he not have eyes on the throne? Sorry? Yeah, but Amnon had his eyes on someone else. He didn't when he didn't have his eyes on the throne. Well, not Delilah. That was Samson. Tamar. Amnon's eyes were not on the throne, but on someone. Tamar, his half-sister. She was the full sister of Absalom. Absalom and Tamar shared the same father, the same mother. Amnon and Tamar shared the same father, but they did not share the same mother. What was Amnon's problem? What was his problem? Yeah, he couldn't get her out of his head. He was sick in love. I'm sorry?
He listened to bad advice.
He did listen to some bad advice as well. He was sick in love. He just couldn't get his mind off of Tamar. Every time she walked by, he's going, or something to that effect. And so somebody says, tell you what you do. Say you're sick. And whenever the king comes to check on you, because you're the crown prince, he has a vested interest in you being alive. Just say, well, just let my sister Tamar come and fix some food, and I'll watch her, and then she can feed me the food, and I think I'll be okay. Would you buy that if you were David?
Just think how much easier it would be if you just married her.
Yeah, I mean, David, yeah, okay, son, whatever you want. Ouch. Okay, son, whatever you want. We do that with our children. an awful lot, too much. Sometimes it's okay, but sometimes they don't grow up assuming responsibility for their lives and working for things. So she came in, she cooked the bread, and he said, send everybody away. I need you to feed me without anybody else in the room. And so he sent everybody away, just her and him, and he raped her. And what did Tamar say? Well, she could have screamed, but she said, don't do this. Just ask Dad. He'll let us get married. Well, the passage is clear. After he has had his way with her, it says that he now hated her even more than he had loved her before. I question the use of the word love, but they didn't have any other word to describe what he was feeling than love in the Hebrew language. And so she rips her clothes, she sprinkles dust on her hair, she goes off, and everybody knows something's happened. And her full brother is Absalom, and he knows what has happened. David knew what happened, but he looked the other way. First of all, what could he do? A price for rape was 50 pieces of silver, and a crown prince could have afforded that. The price for rape was 50 pieces of silver, and then you marry the girl. He could have, he could have enforced him to do that, but it wouldn't have been a whole lot of cash out of his pocket. He's the crown prince. He's trying to keep him happy. He's trying to keep him pacified, because someday this man is going to become king. Well, Absalom was furious. He's furious because of what Amnon did to Tamar, yes. But he's even more furious at Dad. Dad looked the other way and didn't do anything. And so Absalom decided that he was going to just bide his time, and sooner or later the right opportunity would present itself. And when the right opportunity presented itself, then do Amnon in. 2 years later, Absalom decides to throw a big barbecue at his hacienda down on the south end of things. I mean, he lived so far out of town, it's like he was probably further south than Jimmy. That's how far south he was. But he invited Dad to come, and Dad had to defer. And so in the king's place, the crown prince goes. He knew Dad would say no. He knew the crown prince would come. And when he came, he gave his men instructions under no uncertain terms. Make sure you kill Amnon. Well, they do exactly that. They kill Amnon. And what kind of message makes its way back to David? Terrible accident. All of them are killed. And then somebody else shows up and says, no, only Amnon was killed, and it was Absalom who did it. And the light bulb goes off in David's mind. He knows Absalom is coming. And so David gets his group, and they head out of town. No, wait, I'm sorry. I skipped 3 or 4 chapters. Let me back up to the next thing that happens. The next thing that happens is Absalom flees for his life, because he knows he goes to another king in another country. Joab tries to bring Absalom back. Why is he trying to bring Absalom back? Why is Joab working so hard to bring Absalom back? Well, no, at this point, Joab is trying to bring Absalom back. This is before the war. Why was he trying to bring Absalom back?
Because David mourned for Absalom.
Well, that's after he was killed, which was after the war. What happened to Kileab? We have no earthly idea. But with Amnon dead and assuming Kileab is gone, who is the next crown prince? I think Joab was just trying to preserve the smooth transition once David died. He had on his mind what was best for the nation at this particular point in time. And the only real thing I can conclude is that something happened with Gilead, and Absalom is now crown prince because Amnon is dead. And so Joab is trying to bring him back because Absalom, he's wanting to make sure that everything is going smoothly here. Well, what happens is he tries to reconcile David and Absalom, and David says, okay, you can bring him back. I mean, he does it through a wise woman of Tekoa, was it? That came and he put the words in her mouth and she convinced David. And he came back, but he didn't come back into David's good graces. He didn't even see David. He lived in the same city as David, but he didn't come back into David's good graces. David didn't want to have anything to do with him. And so Absalom began to build up a following for himself. He would be in the city gates and people would come in and he'd say, hi there, young man, what are you doing? He said, well, I have a grievance. Well, what's your grievance? Tell me. King is really busy, but I'm the king's son. I'll be happy to listen to you. And then he would give wise advice on how to take care of things. And all the people started to say, wow, he's really pretty good. And then Absalom decides to make a bid for the throne. He won popular support. He goes to Hebron, and where David was crowned king. He goes to Hebron. They crown Absalom king. Long live King Absalom. Word gets back to David. Long live King Absalom. And so David decides to get out of town. And when Absalom returned, David's already gone. Now, it's pretty fascinating when you get into all of this because Absalom had half of David's advisors on his side, including Joab. David had some of his advisors that were still supporting him. David is on the run, and Absalom is there. David left 10 concubines to take care of the palace. And the first thing that Absalom did, per his advisor's advice, was he pitched a tent on the roof of the palace in broad daylight, and he slept with each one of those 10 concubines. Why did they recommend that he do that?
That is taking possession of the king's.
What the former king had, I now have, so I have a claim to the throne. On the way out of town, there's a guy by the name of Shammai who is kicking dust on David and cursing him and swearing him and pelting him with rocks and everything else. And one of his men says, let me take care of him. He says, nah, let him have his opinion. A battle ensues. One of the men that was with David, and he says, I'm following you. And he says, no, you go back. Foil so-and-so's advice. David is gone. Absalom says, what do I do? So-and-so said, well, go after him. And he asked the other guy, what do you think? And he says, well, you know your dad, he's like a mama bear robbed of her cubs. Do you really want to try to deal with him if you don't have the full force of Israel behind you? He says, you're right. He was foiling the other guy's advice. And so what happened is he waited until David was secure, and then battle broke out. In the end, David's forces attack Absalom and defeat Absalom decisively. And one of the things that David said to all of his generals before they went out to engage the Israelite forces, knock them down, get the throne back, but don't hurt Absalom. Help me here. Absalom fled and lived with another king in another country for a couple of years. He had to be talked into bringing Absalom back. He was talked into bringing Absalom back, but he never visited Absalom. Now Absalom has just made a bid for the throne, and David is saying, don't hurt Absalom. Why? You got no backbone?
He wasn't one for disciplining his children.
He was not good at disciplining his children. Amnon is gone. I'm assuming that probably Absalom is the crown prince at this time. Who knows? Maybe he suddenly had a guilt-stricken conscience on how he'd been such a poor dad and he wants to make it up. I don't know. Absalom winds up getting killed. By who? Joab. Joab was the very one who wanted to bring Absalom back. Joab was the very one who was wanting to ensure a smooth transition of power. Now Joab, by bringing Absalom back, why does Joab now kill Absalom? It seems, Joab said bring him back. David didn't want to have anything to do with him. And now at the end of the battle, David is mourning his loss that Absalom is dead, and Joab's the one who killed him. Why the reversal for Absalom? For Joab.
Pretty well took care of the fight.
So much for smooth transition of power, right? It actually resulted in battle. How did he kill Absalom? Stuck him with a spear. Why would Absalom just stand there and say, stick me with the spear?
He was hanging by his hair on a tree branch.
He was hanging by his pretty hair. Have you ever known anybody with really long hair? Did she have it cut once a year and it go back to that length every year?
Well, she was afraid to get on elevators because she was afraid her hair would get caught in elevators.
Ay, ay, ay. Yeah. This guy's hair was so heavy. How did he stand? His neck must have been this big around. He had the muscles out there. And so he's riding on his donkey and he's escaping. And his hair's flopping. And his hair gets caught in that tree and that donkey keeps going and he stops. Oh, I bet that was a crick in the neck. And Joab comes upon him and... Now, somebody's there says, let me run and tell David that his enemy has been killed and that Absalom is dead. And Joab says, no. And he sent somebody who was a runner from another country. Why?
Usually kills the messenger.
David had a history of killing the messengers. The other guy ran ahead and he said, oh, it's over with and everything is taken care of and you have won. And David's response was, what about Absalom? There's a lot of confusion going on. He didn't even fess up. And then the other one, the guy from the other country showed up and he says, oh, he's dead. And David's response? Yeah, Absalom. Oh, my Absalom, my son Absalom. Pity party.
You notice you don't see David going to the Lord or anything.
It is unusual that we don't notice that. We don't know that he didn't, but it's not reported. Of course, in Samuel, it's more of a political document than it is a spiritual document in that regards. But yeah, you're right. We don't. So he's moaning and mourning and, oh, my poor baby boy, he's gone. The crown prince is dead. And all that sort of stuff. And what does Joab do? He rebukes David. And what does he tell David?
Shouldn't be acting like that because the men that went to fight and die or seeing him like that should be having a victory.
This should be a victory party, dude. We just won. We just won the battle for you. I guarantee you, if you do not go out there, and I'm paraphrasing, but this is what he said. I guarantee you that if you do not go out there to your men, not one of them will be left by morning. They would have abandoned him. And so David wiped his face and he went out and says, party on, or however it was worded. Well, let me see. All the way back, whoops, I keep going too far. Amnon, dead, killed by Absalom. Gilead, perhaps dead, absent without leave, whatever. Absalom. Who's crown prince now? Adonijah. Amnon gone. Absalom gone. Whatever happened to Gilead, we don't know. Who's next in line? Adonijah. So the struggle for succession stops in 2 Samuel at this point. Instead, what we have are some appendices where we're just in chapters 21 through 24 where we're just taking care of some loose ends. First of all, chapter 21 verses 1 through 14, something called the Gibeonite interlude. There was a sudden famine in the land, and David went to the Lord and asked the Lord, why is there a famine? And he said, because Saul tried to wipe off, Saul had been told to completely wipe out, leave no trace of the Amalekites, and he brought Agag back. So now he tries to wipe out the Gibeonites, those ites. They're here. Why was that the wrong thing to do? Because they had made a treaty with Joshua. Joshua had made a treaty for God's people that they would be water carriers and woodcutters for them. So he violated that. He tried to destroy them. And so David goes to the Gibeonites and says, oh, Saul is gone. I know this is the problem. This is what's going on. What can we do? And so they gave him 7 of Saul's grandsons. And they killed those 7 grandsons. Do you have a granddad that you're not sure about? No. Did he do something to somebody? You might want to run. No. David's last words, Psalm 22, I just read part of that at the beginning of our time. You read Psalm 18, it's almost word for word identical, Psalm 2 Samuel 22 and Psalm 18. Chapter 23, verses 1 through 7 is sort of David's last oracle. It says it's his final words. And it's interesting reading. It's kind of confusing. The chapter 23, verse 1, these are the last words of David, the oracle of David, the son of Jesse, the oracle of the man who is raised on high, the anointed of the God of Jacob, the sweet psalmist of Israel. And he goes on to talk about how he is in good standing with the Lord. And, God has been good to him. And so it's kind of his, why have things turned out for you the way they have? Because of God's. Chapter 23, verses 8 through 39, there's a list of 37 mighty men who fought for David. 4 individuals, there were 3 of them that were a group called the 3 mighty men, and then there was a group called the 30. One of the 4 individuals was the leader of the 3, and there's some interesting exploits about what these men did. There is in the chapter 23 talks about some of the things that they did. Look at verse 18. Abishai, the brother of Joab, the son of Zeruiah, was chief of the 30. He wielded a spear against 300 men and killed them and won a name for himself, basically, beside the 3. Benaiah, verse 20, the son of Jehoiada, was a valiant man of Kabzeel, a doer of great deeds. He struck down 2 Ariels of Moab. He went down into a pit on a snowy day and struck and killed a lion. But it's interesting as you read through what the 3 mighty men did in 2 Samuel 23, starting with verse 14. David was in the stronghold, and the garrison of the Philistines was at Bethlehem. And David said longingly, "Oh, that someone would give me water to drink from the well of Bethlehem." It was so good. I just wish I had a drink of water from there. No better water in all the world. Well, the 3 mighty men broke through the camp of the Philistines, drew water out of the well of Bethlehem that is by the gate, and they carried and brought it back to David. They heard him. His wish was their command. Of course, he proceeded to pour it out and said, they did this at the cost of their lives. I'm not going to dishonor them dishonor God by drinking all of it. There is, however, one that we want to spend just a little bit more time on, and we'll wrap this up for tonight. David decided to take a census of his fighting men. And this is in chapter 24. And if you look at 2 Samuel 24:1, it says, "The anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he incited David against them, saying, 'Go number Israel and Judah.'" So the idea is God was angry with Israel, and he incited David to take a census. If you flip over to 1 Chronicles 21:1, what does it say?
Stood against Israel. I moved David to number Israel.
Same event. 2 Samuel, God did it. 1 Chronicles, Satan did it. there's a progression in the understanding of the Israelite authors here. I would submit to you that when 2 Samuel was written way back when, easily 500 years before Chronicles, they didn't really understand who Satan was and what Satan was all about. But 500 years later, once they come back from exile, and Ezra, probably the author of Chronicles, whenever he's putting it all together, they had an understanding by this time of who Satan was. And they said, God didn't do that. Satan did that. Why? It's interesting. In chapter 24, the king, verse 2, the king said to Joab, the commander of the army, go through all the tribes of Israel from Dan to Beersheba, count the people that I may know the number of the people. And Joab said, don't do this. This is stupid. May the Lord your God add to the people 100 times as many as they are, while the eyes of my Lord the king still see it. But why are you going to delight in doing this thing? Why was it a bad thing? Only two ideas that are floated out there. First of all, a tax base. He would know who to tax to pay for his army. And the area that was larger would pay more, and the area that was smaller would pay less, because he wanted equal taxes across the board. The other idea that is floated out there sometime is pride. This is what I have accomplished. Well, no sooner did they find out what it is, David is suddenly guilt-stricken. He realizes what he's done. And so he goes to God. And God gave him three options. Here's your options. You can have 3 years of war. You can have 3 months of famine, or you can have 3 days of plague. And God said, well, war, I'd be in the hands of my enemy. Famine, we would be weak and perhaps in the hands of my enemy. Plague, we're in God's hands. Let me be in God's hands because God is merciful. So 3 days of plague. 70,000 Israelites died. David interceded while the angel of death is approaching the city of Jerusalem. He bought the threshing floor of Araunah and he built an altar. Araunah says, let me give it to you. Let me give you the wood. Let me give you the critters that you're going to sacrifice. And he said, no, I will not accept that. I have to pay for it myself. I brought this upon Israel. I'm not going to get away scot-free. And so he made those sacrifices at the threshing floor of Araunah, built by building an altar, and the angel of death stopped, and he did not go in, and he did not attack Jerusalem. Why is this important? That's the threshing floor of Araunah today. Except that's a mosque. The Dome of the Rock. The threshing floor is Temple Mount. Having said all of that, David becomes king. All right, we got that taken care of. David improves Israel and consolidates his power. We got that. Struggle for succession. Amnon, the first crown prince, dies. Absalom, the next crown prince, dies. We have all these loose ends that are tied up. Wait a minute. Who's going to be the next king? Not in Samuel, it's in Kings. And this is only about Samuel. Questions, comments, observations, thoughts?
Maybe I could say to let David do that like he did in Job, and told Satan he could do anything he wanted to Job but kill him, but not kill him. Anything else?
Obviously two different authors from two different perspectives that were writing that. So, yeah. Other comments, questions?
As loyal and as good a servant as Joab was, he left orders for Solomon that he would execute
Joab. Don't let his gray head go down to the grave in peace. But why did he tell him to do that?
I think because he didn't have enough nerve to do it himself.
But what did he have against Joab to want him to be executed?
Well, I think he still held it against him.
Yeah, and he also said he killed 2 innocent men in blood, Amasa and Abner. Yeah, and whenever Absalom rebelled, Joab was on David's side. But what we don't know is he may have killed more people in blood, in innocent blood, more innocent men in blood. And so the idea there's, you can't trust him. He had the best for Israel in mind, but he's a dirty, rotten killer. The kingdom is secure. Be at peace. Joab's not going to let you do that. Yeah. Yeah, he sort of sucker punched Abner. You know, come here. David's, I'm supposed to give you a message from David. Yeah, what is it? This is for my brother.
I think the parallel with Saul, when he directly disobeyed and which he didn't learn, and the result was he died.
Yeah.
David disobeyed God, the wrong people. The result was other people.
Yeah. It's kind of scary to think that people in power can play so loose with Uriah, you know.
I wonder what kind of plague that was that killed 70,000 people today.
I think it's something they ate. No. Bad mutton. Father, thank you for this time. Thank you for the story of David, and we realize that we're not through. Help us learn. Father, help it not be just for doctrine. Help it be for training, for correction, for reproof as needed. In Christ's name I pray. Amen.